Hi folks, who are Tassless today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio no pictures live stream. Please listen to this presentation as you would a radio broadcast as you drive along in your car or your truck or on public transport. In this essay, I'd like to talk about a subject that frequently and intermittently does the rounds. Did or has feminism destroyed, or is feminism largely responsible for destroying the Western world from its heyday in sort of 1970, when a factory worker or somebody at a menial full-time job could still afford to buy a basic house and have a family, to the situation today where even buying an entry-level house and having a family requires that you have to be in the top 10% of income earners. And this is, I'm assuming, a city like Sydney, which is quite expensive in the overall scheme of things. Nonetheless, let's have a look at feminism. Is it responsible? If so, to what extent? Are there other causes? Is there a direct causal link between feminism, its spread, and the effect it's had on Western society? Has it been a positive thing? And if positive, in what way? Has it been really only to the benefit of a small clique of angry Marxist lesbians, for example, because they were the ones who were pushing it? So let's go over that. Now, I'll go back to the first time, and I'm doing this to some extent with hindsight. The first time I came across feminism, as I would understand it today, at least, was I think it's like first year high school. I'm just going from memory here, but first year high school, and there was I remember we had I think it was a sports teacher, and he was, there's a number of sports teachers, some men, some women, but the sports teacher was this guy who fancied himself as a big hairy-chested he-man. So he was talking to us. This is the boys anyway, where he's saying that if you're rude or uncooperative with a lady sports teacher, I think was the thing, and she gets offended in some way, and then he's the big he-man, and if you upset a lady, and I remember him standing there like he was a big fucking tough guy, talking to 11-year-old boys, by the way, really tough. If you upset the lady teacher, then it's my business. And he points to it's my business. So if you upset a lady teacher, it's my business. But at the same time, we were getting messages that women teachers were equal to the men, and they should be treated with equality. Now, as an 11-year-old kid, I mean, I didn't, made no difference to me one way or another, but so I listened to this, but I saw the inconsistency in it. How can women be your equal? This is among teachers. How can women be the equal? But at the same time, you're doing the big he-man thing of protecting the little woman, the little shivering woman, and you're the big tough man. I thought they think you can't be exactly equal, and you need the protection of a big tough man. I as an 11-year-old kid, I just saw the inconsistency in that. Now, at the same time, I hadn't ever perceived women as social victims. My grandmother was a business owner. My grandmother's sister was a business owner and quite a prominent valuer and commentator on antiques. So, my mother went to university, and this sort of thing. So I didn't see women in the context of victims or victim. So that wasn't my perception. I didn't perceive them as lesser or for that matter better or anything. They were just there, and that was how things were. Now, this was very different to people pushing ideologies, because they have a preconceived notion, well, all women are oppressed victims, all men are oppressors, therefore we have to fight back against this. And of course, it's a one-size-fits-all thing, and very ideological rather than couched in reality. So, and you'll notice feminists today, they'll argue women are oppressed, and then they'll go straight to talking about some third world country in Africa. And here are the women living in the richest, most privileged, most protected, most affluent society ever in human history, who are running around claiming that women are victims. I mean, that's a tough gig to push, I would think. But anyway, again, but it illustrates the ideology. Now, I saw the inconsistency in that at 11 years old, the big tough He-Man teacher talking about, if you upset a little woman, you'll have to deal with me. And even as, again, an 11-year-old, I thought, you fucking pathetic fuck. It just didn't gel with me at all. So I didn't say anything, and I was, a kid. So, and this sort of, I noticed this again further in as high school went on, that feminism or attitudes about feminism were creeping into the school system, and it was all about equal outcomes, not about equality. And equality and equal outcomes are different. Even then, they wanted equal outcomes, or equity as it's now called, and didn't care about equality of opportunity. There was always ideological reasons why equality wouldn't work, but why forcing equal outcomes, even if you have to artificially stack the deck, that was a good thing. So the teachers were talking about, and I think this is like third or fourth year high school now, the teachers are talking about equal outcomes, and they're saying, well, boys are coming, because in those days it was strictly pass or fail exams, and boys came first in everything. If a girl even made it into the top 10, it was an intake of breath. They would announce, Billie Jean came ninth in the I don't know, the English exam, or the geography exam or something, and history, and there was an intake of breath. Wow! And the women, the girls that were coming first were, how can I say it, not beauty queens, and this was duly noted by the male school students. Now, the teachers' unions were pushing quite aggressively at the time for equal outcomes, when they were saying, okay, well, there are eight core or main subjects, mathematics, English, that sort of thing. There are 8 cores, or 6, however many it was, 8 core subjects, and boys come first in everything. When that's wrong, that's bad. That's just socially and ideologically bad. Now, why it was bad and how it was bad, nobody's really explaining. But the teachers, and I overheard teachers' unions meetings, things like that. The teachers were saying, well, in order to create a more equal society, we must artificially force equal outcomes, and that will then create the equal society. And this is the imaginary paradise that's always just around the corner to these ideological fanatics. If we just do one more thing, if we crush white men just a little bit more, paradise will ensue. It was sort of that type of wider sentiment. And this was a school that was 99.99% white, by the way. So they were arguing for that out of the 8 main subjects, 4 of those subjects must be cordoned off. They must be sectioned off so that girls would come first. And so boys could come first in 4 subjects. And these were mainly the sciences, like mathematics and physics and chemistry, that sort of stuff. And the girls would come first in the more humanities-based subjects, such as, English and that sort of stuff. So, or social studies, or whatever that was being called at the time. So now other teachers would say, well, how can you do that? Because in a strictly pass or fail exam situation, that we can't control the outcomes. We don't want to cheat and artificially mark or grade the exam papers. So how are we going to create this? The girls come first in these 4 subjects. If boys are coming first, and the top 10 students, and often the top 30% of students were all boys. That was how it was then in a strictly pass or fail exam situation. So the ideological teacher said, well, that's no problem. What we'll do is we'll create a second grading system, which is based on assessment, not based on anything that they've done. It's based on assessment. And we'll just give the girls 100 out of 100 for the assessment all the time, and that'll artificially inflate their grade, and will artificially give them first place. And we'll just give the boys an artificially low assessment. So, but then other teachers were saying, well, how can you give the best boys, the smartest boys who are well behaved in class, who are handing in all their worksheets and doing their assignments and this and that, how can you give them a low assessment when in fact they're doing everything right? They're ticking all the boxes. They're pillars of school society. well, how can you give them a low grade in the assessment and give girls who are weak students a high grade? And this was all waved as, no, 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 no. We're doing this for ideological. Hey, we're creating a paradise here, a paradise on earth. And all you can quibble about is honesty and integrity and accuracy. And, well, that's Hitler talking. So it came into being through that the girls had to be put, equal outcomes had to be created. This then didn't take long for that to be moved into university. And so you had already the beginnings of that machinery that girls would be given easy passes through to junior high, like junior high school graduation, then senior high school graduation, then university admission, and so on. Not for the fact that they are academically any better or achieving any more, but simply because they were given these wave throughs. Then they started grading minorities more. As more and more black and brown people started to appear, then couldn't speak English. Then if they were graded to the same way as the local students were, then they would never pass anything and they would never get out of junior high school. So in order to, again, to create this paradise, this race gender paradise, they were soft marked and the bar that they had to reach. And this just, once it was in motion, this thing, it just snowballed across race and gender and sexuality and so on, class even. And again, the sole purpose was, well, we're doing good work. Our intentions are good. We're creating a paradise. What's wrong with you? Why would you object to that? So this was very much part of the thing, and this was going into the feminist. But the teachers, going back to school, the teachers that were most committed to this and the most vociferous were the angry lesbians. They weren't the ordinary, just and there were a few Jewish teachers at school. They too were very committed to it. One of there was a guy, I didn't realize at the time, but after I was out of high school and college and looking back, I saw an article in a local newspaper that he was heading up some Jewish activist, social justice activist group, and he was one of the school teachers, and he was always very committed to this, equity and equality and a paradise is around the corner. It's very much part of the Jewish thing, so we have to leave the world a better place than we found it, and that means creating a paradise, this equity paradise thing. So the feminism was around in varying forms all the while. Now, corporal punishment, as in getting the cane and the stick, was around at the time, and some of the teachers were certainly over keen and zealous to do that. But I noticed a relationship between male teachers seeking sexual favors from the teachers, with the female teachers, and their very zealous view to, I have to protect the little woman thing. So, there was a teacher who was like the form master, I think they called them at the time. And there was I think he was a music teacher, and she used to run around in this little micro mini skirt, and she was a little girly sort of thing, flitting around doing girly things. But she would suddenly decide she was going to put some boy student in his, and she was, again, it was a sexual interplay, but she would send Billy Bob or Jimmy Jack or whatever to see this form master. And the messages were, very rude boy, please deal with severely. He has upset me. And so the big strong man would come in with the cane, and he'd be swinging away with the bamboo, and and he'd get his prize later on when they all got horizontal, and you're so big and strong, I want to fuck you. And so there was a lot of that going on as well. So it wasn't anything to do with feminism. It was people piggybacking off the feminism thing and pretending to but again, I struggled with this. How can you be a victim and an equal participant deserving of equality if you want to play the victim? I again, as a high school kid, I couldn't get that. Similarly, why would you want to pretend you're coming first in the exam when in fact you haven't come first. So just looking at, say, girls who would get 52% in the exam, so well down the list. The 88% was the top score, and so she's out of 100 students, she's probably around 45th or something there, lower even. But with the assessment added in, the special loading, the special extra bit for girls, she'd go from 52% to 72%, and she'd come 5th in the form, out of 100 kids. But based on assessment, well, again, if you're a good student, why do you need that? And why prop something up artificially? And what's the benefit to the society? And even as a kid, 14, 15, I think, well, you're not really very bright. In fact, you're rather stupid. But now you think you're bright. Now you're getting all the accolades and all the rewards and all the benefits that come with a student who is bright and who's worked and studied hard. You're not bright and you have not worked and studied hard. In fact, you're a pretty lazy student, but you're still being given all the benefits that a hardworking, bright student would have earned. Do we want people running around our society having got all these benefits bestowed upon them when they've done none of the work and they've got none of the intellectual, grunt power to have earned it? Will that make society more equal? Will it make it better? All you're doing is lowering the standard to create this artificial equality. So even as a kid, I understood that, perhaps not with the same level of detailed understanding I do today, but I still saw the core problem there is you're not creating equity at all. You're creating a class of entitled people who do not meet the standard, who are unable to play or participate on an equal playing field. And on that basis, you're hardly going to create a paradise. It'll be the opposite of a paradise, given the dysfunction that will sow into the society and ultimately as these people go through the education system into the workplace. So in this sense, that feminism was already sowing the seeds for its own failure and for the undermining of society as it was. Now, society back then wasn't perfect, by the way, far from it. But it was merit-based, largely, primarily merit-based. And also as a result of the Second World War, when you had to mobilise millions of people very quickly, there was a second tier of merit, if you like, that occurred. Not everyone was going to be an expert in handling, field artillery or something like that. So there was a way of looking. You'd look at people now, who's bright, who's keen, who's a quick study, who picks it up quickly, who can be brought up to an acceptable standard with a minimum amount of time and training. Well, Billy Bob over there, Jimmy Jack down here, they're both smart folk. We can put them that they'll pick it up, and they'll even though they haven't got the full suite of credentials, we need a lot of people to be capable very quickly. So we'll have to pick the brightest of the available people we have. That created a second level of merit. And that aspect of merit was still in play, although it was starting to dissipate and decline, and it was ultimately replaced with meaningless certification of affirmative action type nature. But anyway, this is so coming now to the I guess the modern feminism went for one of the first things they looked at, particularly in the United States. Nearly all the modern, as in the postmodernists they called it, the feminists, they were nearly all Jewish, and either bisexual or lesbian, and they were pushing for equal outcomes in divorce, and also even beyond that, 20 years after divorce, she should be in the same financial position as him 20 years after the divorce, for goodness sakes. So they set everything up in California. California had a co-ownership law, if you like, that went back to the gold rush days of gold claims, or mining, gold mining claims. And the idea was that as California had this joint ownership thing, that all the assets of the marriage were jointly owned by all the people of the marriage, the children and the wife and so on. So in the event of a divorce, and there was 3 children, a woman, and that means there's 5 people. Ostensibly, they own 20% each. And so the man exits the relationship, but only with 20% of the assets, and he has to pay for the upkeep of the children in child support, and if his income's high enough, alimony as well. And so this is the feminists, the Jewish lesbian feminists. They targeted this in particular, and then got Ronald Reagan to sign it into law, for goodness sakes. Ronald Reagan, the supposed arch-conservative. So this was went into divorce law, and divorce law was used quite. Divorce was openly promoted as a vehicle, a way that women could leave the relationship and take the children and the assets and get the alimony and the child support as well. So divorce rates just went through the roof. And this model of divorce, even though it was uniquely built around California law, this model of divorce spread around the whole Western world rather quickly, actually. And within 10 years, it was international. So that seems an odd spread. Why would straight white males, because Parliament was nearly made up fully of straight, why would straight white males sign all that gender conflict type stuff into law? Why are they so keen to do it, so quick to do it? Just seems very odd. But this created again this artificial equity. So a woman who contributed nothing to the relationship, who'd refused to work and was spendthrift and this and that, could still walk away purely on the basis that he made a decent enough income. Remember, purchasing power of the paycheck was quite high, so even a man on ordinary income could still afford to buy a house. So this created this artificial equity thing again, that someone who hadn't worked, had contributed nothing, produced nothing, created nothing, who'd in fact been a dysfunctional member of the family unit, who'd been spendthrift and careless and this and that, could still walk away richly rewarded without any relationship to actual contribution or the degree of responsibility they took within the relationship. So this again became the same thing as the school, where girls who academically were weak were being pushed up to be equal with the boys who were academically strong and were working hard. And look, I'm going back to school just for a moment. I remember the times when it was, the worksheets and the assignments. The people who were the worst and the weakest in doing the assignments and finishing them were the girls. It was just how it was. I didn't think much of it. I just noted that was so. But out of say a class of, for example, 30 students, approximately 15 being girls, that maybe 3 or 4 of the girls were diligent students, or diligent enough that they would at least do most of their assignments. Pretty much all the boys, maybe a couple of boys didn't, but pretty much all the boys were doing. So the difference in attitudes to responsibility, accountability, and doing. And the teachers would ask, well, Billie Jean, this is the third assignment you've missed this term. And Billie Jean would think, it's the dog ate my homework, this sort of thing. And it didn't really care. It was obvious to me as a kid that they just didn't care. They didn't give a shit. And so the only way the equality was going to occur, or the equity is going to occur, was if you gifted them. So it doesn't matter if you don't do your assignments, we'll give you a first place prize anyway. And that's really what was happening in divorce. It doesn't matter if whether you're a good mother, a good wife, or a sensible, prudent, frugal person. That doesn't matter. We'll give you the rewards anyway. And I thought this was quite a retrograde step. Now, if you look at the writings of Betty Friedan, Shulamith Firestein, Ellen Levine, what's her face, Muller, she changed her name to Miller. Again, all Jewish and all activists, and all very much imagining a kibbutz type social structure to be imposed on the Christian Gentile world. These people were given publishing deals. They were paid to crisscross the United States on speaking tours, and who was paying for all that back then? And they were given jobs at universities to preach their hatreds and prejudices and so on. So this wasn't helpful. And in the wider scheme of things, these women, apart from getting, these Jewish activist women, apart from getting involved in the writing of divorce laws and this sort of thing, they were very much arguing for equity outcomes in higher education. That women should, and if courses, special courses should be introduced, like cultural studies or something, where nobody ever failed and everybody could get a degree. And so everybody would have an equal social worth because they would all hold a degree. So the hardworking, bright guys had a degree. Well, we want that for people who are not bright and don't work hard, because then that would create equity. So this attitude to equal outcomes and equity, I think, eroded and undermined standards in all areas, whether it be education or lower education, higher education, and legal practice and so on. And of course, this spilled out into employment affirmative action, and why our when I first started work, especially in the more technical areas, there was the only women that worked there were in secretarial, receptionist type roles. All the technical roles were men, and the demands were fairly high. So the work demands and so on were fairly high, and it was only after I'd been in the workplace for some years, there started to be, well, why don't we have an equal number of women? The measuring the social worth and the goodness of the the enterprise, the business, the company was if women have an equal represent. But why? Well, and nobody could say even back then, and it just somehow was just mentioned it. Well, it's a good. It's somehow a social good. Equity. But the standards again had to be lowered and lowered there was lots of feminist screeching and preening and hollering from the rooftops and so on that if women weren't equally represented in the best paid jobs, then it must represent something terribly evil. Hitler maybe was the personnel guy, the HR guy, but it was noticeable from word one or day one that standards had to be lowered. And for my own role as a VP and EVP and this sort of thing, they're having to front the board of directors and have them pester me all the time about why aren't there more women and this sort of thing. And I say, look, women only make up 2 or 3% of the applicants. None of them actually make the grade. None of them make the cut. Do you want me to employ unqualified people? If so, give me a written directive and I'll do it. But put that directive in writing. Why would you want to employ unqualified people? And even the people that were employed were just not up to it. The women were employed to some, they were lazy, they were entitled, they wanted special dispensations, they were terrified of being judged. So, well, we want all the benefits of that thing. In the same way with education, we want to come first, we want the accolades, but we don't want to have to do the work or take the responsibility. And that attitude is exactly the same in the workplace. Now, you can find exceptions, and I totally agree with that, but the exceptions are rare. That mentality of entitlement and laziness and why do I have to work as hard as them? If I have to do the same job as them, that's oppression. But if I don't get the rewards that the hardworking people get, then that is also oppression. So this permeated society at all levels and in all ways, and it created a permanent gender conflict paradigm, which we still see with us today. And we also see the effects on law and legal practice. For example, at the moment, there's lots of debates raging length and breadth of the Australian legal profession, where the activists have penetrated law reform bodies and all across the legal body, everywhere, all across the activist women are in the ascendant. And one of their claims is, well, look, we're not getting enough convictions in rape cases. Convictions should be higher. Well, wow, well, why should we? If they've gone through court and there's no evidence, then doesn't that mean that the legal system is working then? Because if the evidence isn't there, why should innocent people be convicted? No. Women never tell lies. So this is their sort of launch pad here. Women never tell lies. and therefore any allegation of rape must be true. And if we're only getting 10% conviction rate, then that must be because there's something wrong with the law. It must be. Well, it's not. Must be. Well, what other reason could it be? And again, this idea of women need special handling and dispensation, special allowances that aren't afforded to anyone else. Now, so they want the burden of proof reversed. So if she accuses him, absent evidence, if she accuses him of rape, then he must prove he didn't do it. This is what they want. Also, his character can be examined in minute detail to find something in it that makes him look bad, but her character is not to be examined that might produce something that makes her look bad. And so these sort of reversals of due legal process, rules of evidence, all this sort of stuff, turning the legal practice on its head purely for the purposes of getting more convictions. Now, the convictions that they're not getting that they want are the middle class white males. Where the black and the brown guys do it, there's usually plenty of physical evidence, witnesses, all sorts of. So the black and brown guys, they don't have trouble getting them, and they're the biggest perpetrators in the overall scheme of things. But the scalps that the feminists want is the middle class white males, straight white male. Those are the ones they want, and those are the ones where it's a he said, she said. She's agreed to the date, and they've been dating before. They've had intimate relations previously, but on this one occasion, the second before he ejaculates or orgasms, she says stop, and he doesn't stop quick enough, and so technically it's rape. The other case that these feminists want is that she's had a couple of drinks, and so she can't really give consent. So they want to take away her agency and say, well, she can't give consent. Therefore, even though she did give consent, it's not really consent because she's a social victim somehow, because she had a glass of wine to me. That means she can't give consent, or any consent she gives is not valid. Therefore, it's rape. So chasing straight white males on the basis of technical rape. There's no violence, no threat of violence, no deceit or none of that, anything like that. It's purely a technical matter of, she had half a glass of wine too much, or more than the legal prescribed allowance for consent. She had half a glass of wine too much. Therefore, she couldn't give consent. Therefore, he technically raped, that type of stuff. And this is where they particularly want to change the law so that they can, and the practice of law, so that they get. So the pure purpose isn't to create higher levels of exactitude in the practice of law. Far from it. It's quite the opposite. That they want to loosen things up and have them vague and ideological and miasma-like, so that they can secure more convictions. And she's probably going to get legal aid. He's got to pay his own, and so he's. Now they also want to do a plea bargain thing where they can say, well, look, she had 50 mils of wine too much, therefore we can nail you on rape. Take a plea deal. You do guilty to technical rape, and you can have a month in prison and a 5-year good behaviour. So hey, victory in the gender wars. We got a straight white middle class male and we stuck it up that motherfucker. And so but that's creating a watering down, and indeed I would argue an eradication of the judicial and just process of justice. We've got radical prosecutors who are bringing cases to court that shouldn't be anywhere near a courtroom. And we've got, desperately, they're trying to insert activist judges into the courts, specialist rape courts with radical activist judges to hear the case, and so on and so forth. And then changing the rules of legal practice, changing the rules simply to secure more convictions of straight white middle class men. And so this is the effect of feminism. These are the effects of feminism, and it's a downhill slide, and it's a downhill trend. Now we can go into other things like declining purchasing power, since women have come into the workforce in larger numbers, and they're looking at marriage and procreation now as an option that is just there. It's a casual option. Why would you lower your standard of living to have children? Because she's got to stop work or work less hours, or you've got more cost looking after the child. And the childcare costs are an issue, by the way. I mean, for women who want to work, particularly if you're in the lower income band, which most of the women are, the cost of childcare is astronomical. For women, again, for women on lower incomes, the cost of childcare is more than, or almost equal to the income that they make. So why the fuck would you work when you're faced with that? And women that we know who've got even primary school age children, they just no, you come home, get the bus home, but I can't afford to pay for the childcare. So you've got 8-year-old children really just looking after themselves until mum comes or parents come back from work. Now that's not unusual. So when I was a kid, the idea of I remember 4 or 5 years old walking to school, and people didn't think about it back then. Today it's considered to be unusual. So that's my view that feminism has played a pivotal role, not simply because of what it's advocated or that this idiotic sort of paradise that it's pursuing. In order to pursue the paradise, everything has to be dumbed down. All standards have to be lowered in order to create this illusion of equity. It's not really equity. It's artificial enforced equity that isn't equity at all in reality. And also the knock-on effects in reducing purchasing power of the paycheck, dilution of the quality of the legal system, dilution in the quality of education, and on and on and on it goes. And so I would argue that feminism has been a huge drag on and undermined Western society. And also it's stifled I think, a lot of innovation. Why would you want to be a high achieving straight white male if you're going to get attacked for being a misogynist, patriarchal Nazi or something? You wouldn't. And so a lot of men are just simply sitting it out quietly because it's just not worth sticking your head up above the parapet. You've been fantastic today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.